Hello, everybody, everyone. Back to do more painting. Hope you've been doing some on your own. Okay. Um, so, got my watercolors. Hope you got yours. Brush. We just need one. And then um, we watercolor paper. Very important. And waters. I have two containers here. You don't need much water, but I got one and two. Um, and I want to concentrate the camera on the paper. So I may focus here and there, like always, you know the routine. But I was thinking today when I say in the title explore, it's just to do some things in watercolor, see how they come out. Um, I recommend in the future, maybe not for this class, but have with you always just a pencil and a pen, a black pen, ball pen, the regular, very inexpensive pen and a pencil to have with you and some paper. Okay, this is not just for this, it's just for your daily, you carry it with you. You could like note down ideas or sketch, or and when it comes to the class you could just pull those up besides the materials that you can see right here and the water that we need specifically for this art activity with watercolors. But you can count that you'll have your pencil and you can count that you will have your pen. Okay. um, I've done videos in which I use the pen, we outline things a little better. It's a little more fun to color that way. It's a different type of approach. But let's explore some of the things we know and let's get started with painting some things in watercolor. And like again, I say in the title, explore it. So we already know the wet on wet technique. Um, you know, I could put my color on my brush that's activated, which is wet, you see, on dry paper. Or I'm going to clean my brush really well. I can wet my paper area. You see how it's clear because it's just the paper being wet. Get my same color. And now this is the famous wet on wet. Because the brush is wet, right, with the pigment, and the paper happens to be wet also on this area. Okay. I want you to see right now how different the effects are. You see, up is dry, wet on dry, down is wet on wet. Or I could actually put it sideways. So to the right, to the left is wet on dry, to the right is wet on wet. You see how on wet the green kind of disperses and dissolves, and the wet parts of the paper that the brush didn't touch do want to get that green, so they pull it in right here. While this is a little more dry, the one right here on the left. Okay, so that's the distinction we already know and notice. Again, wet on dry, wet on wet. So wet on wet is very known in watercolor because that effect of diffusion is very beautiful. You could create skies, you could create the whole watercolor actually. So I had students in the past ask me, hey, don't we need to wet the entire paper before we start? And I haven't got there, but that's what watercolor artists routinely do when they do their work. They just wet the entire paper before they start. They've done it for many years. This is what they, what they do, their career. So we're learning, and you could get there, and if you want, you could take that approach. Or we have done where we wet the entire area. We're gonna do the sky, and we approach it this way. But ideally, as you get more experience, the goal is to tape your watercolor paper, staple it on a board if you need to keep it steady, and wet the entire thing, and then get started working. And your watercolor painting will be done in this unique uh, effect or technique that is what watercolor is known for. The whole pinning down the paper with tape, and if you have a board, not on the table obviously, but on a board, you staple it down, is because paper, when it gets wet, we already know, bends and bends and deforms. Later when it dries all bended, and you gotta straighten out while it dries. Once it's dry, sorry, you put it in something that like inside a book, a very thick book or something. But in the meantime, the whole stapling it and tape is to control that bending. Okay, that's what it's for, especially large pieces of paper, and papers that are taking in so much water. The thick the um, the nature of the paper. Great. This came out really good to point out this effect. I'm really happy with it. They both very different from each other, and they're exactly highlighting the technique we have learned. So this right here in the middle, this right here is the wet on wet. You see how diffusive effect, and this right here is the wet on dry. Okay, so now we know that, and we're just doing things we know. Um, so you could also do this on dry. This is dry. You could also do this. You could also put on dry, sorry, on dry paper, your color. You see that? But we know that it's wet, right? Even though the paper was dry, when I put my color, now it's wet with this color. So I clean my brush really quick, and look, I add blue to one area, and look, I'm mixing colors in the actual painting as I do. Okay, sorry, but basically this is about wet on dry, but adding colors. You see that blue? Okay, clean my brush. Let's see what happens. This to point out what I'm trying to do right now. I'm gonna use two different colors, but you could do it with so many other colors. But I want to use this color so you could actually very clearly see it on the video. Okay. So in this one, um, I'm gonna put yellow, wet on dry. The paper is dry. The paper is actually dry. You see that? Now it's still wet. It's still wet, my color, because I know. And now we're gonna put color right on top of this, but not like in this blue one, okay? Sorry, we're gonna put the color. Um, let's see, I'm gonna use blue, but I'm gonna put it in little kind of dots. Some dots are bigger than the others, but it's diffusing because it's wet. You see that diffusion effect we're getting? They look like stars. That's the blue diffusing into the wet yellow that's there. You get that because we get this effect because where we're putting the blue is an area that is wet. Is the yellow color that is wet. Okay. Let's try this again, in which the yellow has also diffused on wet paper. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing, but instead of wet on dry, it's going to be wet on wet, the yellow, and then the blue again on top of that yellow. See if it looks exactly the same. My theory on my experience is that the blue is going to diffuse a little more because what will happen is that the paper will be so damp, so wet. So let's wet the paper. Same effect. It's just that we're this time doing it on wet paper rather than dry paper. So this is our yellow, you see, diffusing on the wet on wet. And now this is a little more saturated with water than the one up here. I'm going to add that blue. Clean my brush. You gotta be quick. You can't wait too long. If you wait too long, the it will dry because right, it's been absorbed by the paper. So here's one, two. Yep, my theory was right. The blue is diffusing a tiny little bit more because the surface is more wetter. It's more wet. I'm gonna make this one bigger by tapping it, a few next to each other, so they don't all have to be the same size. So you see, this is wet on dry. The first one, this is wet on wet, the yellow and the blue on top. You see how the bottom one tends to be a little bit more diffuse, the blue, tiny little bit. It's the same effect. You may not see much difference, but there is a little bit of it. Actually, let me put it down. This maybe we cover more. So the one that is wetter is the last one, the one on the right. Sorry, the one on the left, and the blue tends to diffuse more because the paper is more saturated with water because we wet the paper first and then we add wet paint yellow. So that's double water into that paper. On this one, the yellow was wet, obviously, but the paper was dry. So the moment you put that yellow, the paper is purely absorbing it. Here, it absorbs it, yes, but it's also so wet that it's still, you see what I'm saying? As I move the paper, the blue tends to be on the one to the left, more has more room to disperse, is what I'm saying, because there's more water. That's all. So these little things you need to be aware of. This one is the one where we did wet on dry, but half of it is green, half of it is blue because I added the blue, and this one is wet on wet, and this one is wet on dry. You see how it's a little more solid and the edges. So what happens when you do wet on dry is the borders of that color are very sharp because that's as far as the water went into dry paper. While here, the borders of the color are very diffuse because the paper was wet. And the moment you put the color, even though it's being absorbed by the paper, the outline gets diffused because there's still water there that does not make these sharp outlines. Does that make sense? But anyway, just be aware. These techniques we're practicing and practicing, and we've been doing this for a few times. This just right now, what happened here on the one to the left, the blue being diffused like that and moving. This is just me moving the paper. As I was showing you, I moved the paper, so the blue followed that movement. Okay, so let's focus right there. So the reason why the blue moved like that, it was the way I moved the paper. So if I have moved the paper to not up and down, but to left or right, it will have moved that way because it's wet water, just like, okay? So that's why it moved like that. But again, what I was saying, as we practice these techniques, we uh, really drill on our brains the effects, and we need to really memorize these things by experience because when you do watercolor, it all boils down to understanding what the effects you're going to cause, how the water is going to behave, and that's what makes that's the reason why watercolor is amazing. At the same time, is the reason why you have heard people are sometimes afraid of watercolor, or they say that it's really hard. It's not hard. It's just they haven't yet acquired the knowledge to understand what's happening when when they put too much pigment or too much water, or all these things. It's a language of effects that you need to be aware of. So that's why we're doing this repeatedly so much. Okay. What else can we do? This could have been done um, with a darker color and then trying to add a lighter. That's not as outstanding as lighter with darker. You see, this is that lighter yellow. The blue is a darker tone color, so it points out. If I had done blue and then I add the yellow, yes, you're gonna be able to see the yellow a little bit, but not as much pronounced as here, as the other contrast. Because what is one of the rules we have learned, right? Leave um, you want to leave later on, or last, the darker tone colors, just like we did here with the yellow, and then the second one was the actual blue. So when you paint watercolor, you're gonna learn that rule too, in which you want to start with lighter tones and finish with darker. If you start with darkers, what happens is any lighter gets get you won't be able to see it on top of the dark, okay, tone, or it will be harder to produce that color purely, because it will be affected by the darker tones, okay. Something else we can do, check this out. I'm gonna do the same effect, okay. um, but when I put the yellow, okay, I'm gonna do it wet on dry. Follow me here. When I put the yellow down, I'm gonna leave some gaps of the paper. I'm gonna leave some gaps. Look, I'm gonna leave a little hole here, a little circle. You see how I'm leaving little openings where you can see the paper? You'll see why are we doing this in a moment. I want a lot of them, so this is why. Okay. So bear with me here. There's a lot of little gaps. And the reason is why, but I cannot wait too much because I want still the yellow to be wet. Okay, not too wet, but wet enough for what we're gonna do next. So make sure I'm going around again, if you think of my yellow, because I'm making sure that it's still wet. Okay, so now we're gonna add the blue again, those little dots, and they're gonna diffuse when they touch the yellow. But when they touch the white paper, okay, they should be just blue because that area hasn't been touched by the yellow. So I'm gonna put my blue dots on that white area. At some point they're gonna touch, you see, the yellow. Following it? And if I touch too much the yellow, I will bring green to that other spot. So what happens with green, sorry, with blue and yellow, they make green, right? So the area that I'm touching my blue for the first moment is becoming just pure blue because that area was not touched by the yellow. But the moment the blue spreads out, then it starts touching that yellow, which is still wet, and then it starts diffusing. Does that? So it's different. The effect is different because it diffuse, yes, but the area that the blue is touching first is blue. It's more pure blue because it's touching white paper, while these ones touch straight into the yellow. These ones are touching white paper. That It's neither wet, no, neither has color. Okay. And another thing we can do, let's practice this. This will be wet on dry. So let's do our yellow. Do horizontal, left to right, right? Use water. Kind of tone down the yellow with water, not too much pigment. You see the pigment is up here. Now down here, I'm bringing down just water. And what that does is lights up the yellow, so it comes down lighter. As it's coming down, it's becoming lighter. Okay, so now I'm gonna grab my blue, just a little bit, not too much. And I'm gonna bring it down here. I'm gonna leave a gap. I'm gonna leave a gap between the yellow and the blue. And I'm gonna bring this blue up. And at some point, it's gonna touch. I'm gonna bring it up not with pigment, but with water also. You see? I'm sorry if it's getting out of focus. It's my hand. So I'm bringing it up lighter. The blue down here is darker. But now this is just water up here. And the water will touch yellow with blue. What happens with blue and yellow becomes green. So then now this middle becomes green. See that? Okay. So on that note, that's I could have done also. Let's do the yellow again next to it. Yellow, and now I bring just water. So basically we're trying to diffuse and tone down, grading from yellow to lighter. The reason why it's becoming lighter, the reason why it's becoming lighter as we go down is because um, there's less pigment and there's more water. Okay. Let's try this. I'm gonna use green this time and do a lighter green area. Wet on dry, very light. See how that whole area is light? Leave it like that and let's wait for it to dry. You see how that's light green? Because I use a little bit of green and I spread it out with water. So I'm gonna wait that for that to dry a little bit. Okay. You could do that with different colors too, and we're gonna get back to it in a moment with glazing, which means that you put another color on top of the color that's already there, usually dry, to make it glaze. Because if it's not dry, what will happen? We already did it here. A color on top of another color while it was wet. But a color on another color on a color that's dry, I have to wait for this to dry. And then we're gonna put the green just to see how the green will look. And it should look darker when both greens, right, touch each other because it's layered, it's glazed. Something you could be aware of too is you grab water, you get your pigment, in this case, blue. Okay. Actually, I could dry my brush with a tissue. So I'm gonna get some tissue, dry my brush, get the pigment again, and wash. You see that effect on the paper? You see that effect on the paper of the little edges? That's because the paper is corrugated. Watercolor paper has texture. It's like a sponge. I have talked about this before. So when the brush is dry, when it has not too much water, you get this effect. And you may want this effect, you know. Um, if the brush had blue, because that's the color blue, and it's really wet, look, it will look like this. If it's not dry and it has the good consistency of water, it will be a nice, good flow of pigment. I could make that darker by adding more blue so you can see it. Okay, you see the difference? So that has a better flow because it's not dry. This one. These three ones are dry. So your brush eventually, as you paint, it will dry it off and it will become like that. So watch. It will go from, let's see if I could get it in this stroke. It could go from wet to, yeah, I got a little bit towards the end. So I'm going to focus here. You see stars like this one. Look at this one to the right. I'm going to move the paper. It starts like this, all wet, all wet, all wet. And as it's moving, it's losing water. So it start getting those stippling effects. See? And then over here, what happens is that there's less water, so you get that effect. I didn't have much room to create the effect, but you get the idea. Um, I think this is dried enough to make the effect. So I'm gonna grab some light blue or actually let's use green again. Um, let's see what happens when we do some lines in green. See the green on top of the green gets a little darker. So you could have those effects, and you could actually have it with different colors. So let's paint a few things in the next half hour, and um, I know we keep doing these effects and things like that. But this green effect that we did, you could do it when you do foliage in the trees. You could do it with rocks and ground, with browns and yellows and oranges, you know. Um, so just be aware you could easily do those techniques. Um, all right, so without drawing and using a pencil, we can paint different leaves. Try to follow my techniques here. So this one is gonna be round, not round, but kind of a fat leaf. So I fill it in. I'm giving a little bit of more shape. Make it pointy at this end, and give it a little stem in this other end. All right. And now we're gonna do this to it. Okay. Follow me here, because this is like a rose leaf. You can do this. You can give it little pointy patterns here, and to blend in, then you go back with the brush. I'm going over so I could get rid of the outline line, you know, you know. Same thing on the other side, right? If you do wanting something on one side, you got to do it on the other. So I'm making these points going out. Let's go over them again and diffuse all this water here to get rid of the first outline we had that I can still see right there. I'm gonna diffuse this and blending it in with everything. It's good. I think it worked out. See, I could get more green and diffuse the green from the base up, so it will be darker down here compared to all the way up. So this down here will be darker. And another thing that needs to be darker is the maybe middle line that divides, right? That big vein I always talk about. So I go and make a line that goes from here to the tip right there. You could also maybe if you choose darken one side more than the other, that happens with leaves and it shows a distinction. Okay, so this side will be darker than the other side. And that adds more reality to it. You see? Okay. There are leaves that I'm going to add yellow to this. There are leaves that may be a little more elongated. So you make a line like this, and then you go and build up and kind of join this. The paper is very dry, you know. So what I did on this side happens on the other side. And I could choose to make it more green because I add yellow to this side. So now I can make it this side, make it more green. The paper is dry, so the moment I put the brush, it absorbs all that color. And I'm left without any liquid on my brush. It's so thirsty. The paper, you know? Okay. If one side is too big compared to the other, you could add more of that color. In this case, I'm trying to bring more of the green. There you go. And the leaf has also a little stem. Yeah, you could do all kinds. You could do some that are like this. Let's move on with the leaves. This will be the last. You can make it one that has like that is like this. You made a thin line. Make sure it's a thin line. Okay, and from that thin line, look at this, comes out one leaf here at the tip. Let me get enough green. One leaf at the tip, one leaf here. These are kind of detached. One leaf here. You see, the paper is very dry, like I keep saying. So that's why it absorbs a lot. Another leaf here. It's kind of like a oval. So if one is here, 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 one is here. I don't know, three, four, maybe two more. And the fact that I'm using different greens, well, it's the same green, sorry, different levels of tones by the water. You know, the quantity of water gives the green a different um, tonality. So then I attach them to that main line by a little um, line here. You see, line, 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 kind of like a vine, line, line. And I may go over it again darker over this entire thing. Maybe something it's like that. I don't know. It will dry up. So, and as you do these things, you create your own style, you know. Um, we have obviously the famous leaf that is like this. Let's do the stem, right? A thin line. And then you go and you do it from the beginning. You do this wavy things going in, in, in. It's kind of like the ocean, like waves. Same thing down here. That's like the outline. I'm going to fill it in right now. But emphasize those curves. Painting you could do on your own time will be really cool. Google, different patterns or of leaves and flowers, and you could start by drawing them, with pencil very lightly, and then with your watercolors, you create this painting full of different kinds of patterns and leaves, and it will be very interesting because you end up with like a huge, I don't know, image or painting of like all these different techniques and patterns. So the leaves tends to be like this. And now with blue, because I want to emphasize and show very well, I'll do I have to wait a little because this is very wet. So the moment I do that line, you see the line that I'm going to do here should be when it's dry, because otherwise when I draw the line and it's wet, it's going to, remember, diffuse it. And I don't want to diffuse. I want to make sure that it's highlighted. Okay, so I'm going to wait for that. I'm going to go back to that just to make that first line again that splits it in half. The vein is the vein that goes through. I'm cleaning my brush. Cleaning my brush. Get on focus. I think that's good. Um, cleaning my brush, and then let's do some things. So okay, basically draw or color a few things. We done plenty of flowers, so something you can do. Oh yeah, we did oranges, lemons, um, avocados, things. But look at this, right? If I take my blue, and we're just gonna experiment, okay? We could do a few of them. We could finish by doing a few of them. Um, if I take my blue, make sure in this, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna purposely leave some gaps of white of the paper. But look, I'm gonna paint a glass that has water, obviously, because with the blue is I'm pointing out that it's water. I'm adding more water to this blue here, so the blue is not too rich in the pigment. So okay, so now I know um, that if I draw a glass, see how it's light blue? I'm going to purposely shape it, right? Here I curve like a cylinder, and I go up again. But this is where I have to be careful. It's light blue because remember all the water that I added here? So now I want to make sure to leave white gaps on the paper. So I want to leave a big gap here, okay? I want to leave a few lines here. And maybe I'll fill in this middle here. And we're going to start filling in with darker blue, but we're going to use the white of the paper to keep those highlights. So the white would not stay like this. Sorry, some white will stay because it will be completely highlighted, but some areas will get filled in. So see, so I could maybe pretend to show a little bit of the other curve down here. Of the other side of the cylinder that we can see through. And I can close up here with this curve, just like in the bottom. And then close up the oval that completes the glass right there to almost show it. Okay. So now we're going to fill in and leave some gaps. Okay. So I'm going to fill in here, but leave a little bit of the gap. Basically, what I'm saying is like, yes, they're highlights, they're white, but not the entire thing is going to be showing white. So right here, I could make some bubbles, one big bubble and one smaller bubble, and fill in the rest and leave a line. I don't know, and fill in the rest. You see, maybe, oops, a little bit of connection up here, and highlight this line again, and a connection middle here and up, and then show more of this line back here with darker blue. See how you create kind of transparency, and you add blue over blue. It's just a glass that. Let's emphasize the same thing, and I have an idea. So down here, I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to emphasize the blue only halfway through, like a half. You see, I'm doing the whole, right now I'm doing the entire oval here to show the top of the glass. But what we're going to do is we're going to emphasize the blue only halfway through here. Another oval, because this is where the water is. And then we fill in this with blue, we may leave a line that goes through here. And I'm emphasizing the blue down here because, again, like I just said, this is where the water is. Well, this is like a container trying to show transparency. We're experimenting. This is how we get better, okay? Um, Here you could probably show some highlights too. And we can show that there's more blue here. So glass, I don't know, half foot, I should go more straight here. It's kind of curve, more up. You get the idea. Or it could be a jar. Let's make it a jar. Well, this is a glass, and then since this entire thing is all blue, I'm gonna make it a jar by putting a cap on the top. And the cap will be gray. So this is black, but because I add water to it, the water against the paper makes it gray, because gray is actually black, light. The colors like gray are basically is black that has been light up by white and becomes gray. Same thing with pink. Pink is red that has been light up, adding white. You could do that with any color. Why is there not a name for, there is for blue that has been light up, um, with white? It's called a certain blue. But if you think of pink, pink is not, when you say pink, you don't relate it much to red. Or same thing with gray. Gray kind of connects to black, but I don't know. Here I'm gonna put the gray on top of the blue and give it a little thickness over. And in a moment, I'm going to go over a little darker, meaning a little more pure pigment black, to kind of outline where, remember the outline here goes, the one on top. The problem is it's still wet, so my color is been mixing with the others and getting those little bubbles or balls. But now we can tell that it is a container. And the problem now is that I may have to add that gray and black in other parts of the jar, especially this line here. You see, if I did it up there, I have to bring it down here. You gotta be delicate and simple. Maybe I'll highlight this curve. Maybe a little bit on here, but not too much. And that's it. Curve this. Looks like a salt shaker. Um, okay. There you go. It will focus eventually right there. But we're experimenting, We made a jar, we made a glass of water. What else can we do? I'm gonna leave it to you to do other things. In the last video, we did a lot of fruits, strawberries, blueberries, lemon, oranges, some slices. Um, you can make designs. So here, I'll finish the last 5 minutes with this. If you want to practice calligraphy too, not calligraphy, but writing, I'll just give you a few tips, and you could do your own thing and research the rest. But one of the rules is you need a round brush like this. I'm gonna draw it. So a flat brush is like what you use. A flat brush for painting is kind of like the same shape of the brush that people use to paint a house. So it's like this, the famous this brush that is like this. Can everybody see this little drawing? So if you have this same tip but in a painting brush, that's called a flat brush, not this one that we're using. So you don't want to use a flat brush for this technique of writing that I'm going to tell you right now. The most versatile brush is the one you have that came with your kit or you have, which is the classic brush that if you see the handle, um, you know, kind of looks like this, like a drop of water. Looks like that, like a candle. Okay, that's the handle, and this is the tip, just like the one. If you look at mine, it kind of looks like that. The base could be thicker. Sorry, it will focus in a moment if you give it a second. There, there it is. So mine, the real one that you see there with the handle blue, could probably have a thicker base, kind of like that, but it is a round brush. And what happens is the base have a lot, the hair that's at the base, as it comes to the tip, gets shorter and gets cut, and the tip gets narrower. Okay. So this is very versatile because this allows you to, when you press down on your brush, have a thicker line, and when you barely touch the paper or the brush barely touches the paper, is a thinner line because there's less hairs. Okay, we have done this before. We have gone over this. So, for example, if I press down, all that hair, right, makes a thick line. Let me get more water and more color here. Sorry, that's the dry. Um, so if I press down, I make that thick line. See, I'm gonna do it again. Press down, makes that thick line. That was a good example right there. Come on, camera. There you go. Again, if we press down, you get that thick line, right? But if I barely press down or touch the paper, I'm gonna get a thicker line. Why? Because the brush, look how thin this is. Because the brush has less hairs at the tip. They kind of like a candle. They all converge to the tip, and they become small. It's like a haircut. I forgot the name of the woman haircut, but you cut in levels, and then it becomes narrower at the tip. Okay. Anyway, so the point is that you can make thicker lines and thinner lines as you press down on the brush. So that's also what happens with a calligraphy pen. Okay, you press down on the calligraphy pen and it opens up and it creates a thicker line. You lift the pen, less pressure, it becomes a thinner line. Okay, so the rule, and there's patterns and ways to understand and know um, what movement go up and what movement goes down when you write letters. But the rule with italics, or is that when you go up, you do thinner, and when you go down, you do thicker. Um, okay, so good exercises for this. Maybe you want to get started with the exercises and not writing letters right away. But a good exercise will be this that I'm going to do right now. Let me see if we can focus. Please, please, please focus. I know you're not focused yet. There you go. Okay. Good exercise. What did I say? Going up thin, going down thick. You see how I'm going to press down. You see how the line to the left is thicker than the one to the right? It's because when I went up on my right, I went up barely touching the paper, and when I went down to my left, I um I pressed down. So I'm going to emphasize that a little more in this one. So up thin, down thicker. Up thin, down thicker. So this is a good exercise, and you could keep doing this pattern. You could do wavy lines. Look, wavy lines in which you go up thin, down thick, up thin, down thick. We could make them more curvy. Up thin, down thick. Um, but getting that rule of understanding that when you go up it's thin, when you go down it's thick, and that's. I'm gonna write some letters for you right now. I'm not a calligraphy artist, but I know the basics. So if you do the letter E, will become almost like it will be actually like what we just did here, what we did in this pattern, in this exercise. Sorry. So this exercise is almost like when you do write the letter E. So you go up thin and then you come down thicker. Okay. Um, I'm trying to think what to write. Let's see. I'm gonna write fun. So fun goes up thin, down thick. I should have more room. Sorry. Thin, thick. As you go down, thin. Obviously, this is not measured, but there's measurements and things you need to follow. And then the U, you go up thin, go down thick, thin, thick, thin. The thing you need to make sure also is that you have enough, that your brush is wet enough. Fun and the letter N, up thin, down thick, and then you could go up thin and maybe embellish it if you want. If I want to elongate this and bring it up the way up here, you could embellish the word. But oh, I wasn't showing it. Sorry, on the camera. Let me write it again. Let me write something else again. So I wasn't showing you the word. Um, let's do something that will be on the shot. I apologize for that. So the letter L, thin. Remember, I said going up is thin, down is thick. Let me do it here. I'll do it where the yellow is. So up, down, thick, up, thick, down, thick, um, thin, down, thick, up, thin. But you get the idea. I'm writing light. So up, thin, down, running out of liquid, thick, thin, down, thick, up, thin, down, thick. There were like, but this was just, it's very not not perfect and delineated, but you get the idea that if you do a letter A, look, down is thick, remember, and up is thin. Down is thick and up is thin. So that's the italics letter A, you know. But if you want to write your name, you don't want to keep practicing writing your name with the brush. You could do it with this brush. That's the thing, the magic of this brush. So another letter, the letter O. So down is thick, right? That's what we said. And we wrap it around with a thin because it's gonna go up thin, but it comes down thick. So that's the letter O. The letter R goes down thick, and that little part that sticks out on the letter R will come down thin. That's your letter R. It will focus. Let's be patient. Right there. That's the letter A in italics. And I try to write light down here, and I wrote fun, but you couldn't see it because I was writing out of camera view. I apologize for that. But anyway, this is all we did today. We did a bunch of exercises and practice the basics again of wet on dry, wet on wet. Wet and wet is very common. It's exactly what people mostly like. This is wet. This is wet. Wet on dry. Sorry, wet on wet. I believe. No, it's wet on dry. But then we added the blue, so half of it is blue, half of it is green. Wet on dry. Come on. Wet on dry. Wet on wet. Wet on dry. Half of it blue, half of it green. Here we added stipples of blue into the yellow that was wet on dry, and this is wet on wet yellow with stipples of blue. You see how I said there will be a little more dispersed than this one. The blue is emphasized because we left room on the paper to put the blue down. Here we graded down from yellow to blue. Here we graded from yellow to almost disappearing because we kept on adding water. And I wrote some words. We did glazing here, which is colors on top of other colors. We practiced on leaves. I My main emphasis here when we were doing the glass and the jar is for you to please keep in mind that you could take advantage of the paper itself to create highlights or to leave areas white because the paper is white. Okay, you see, I'll show you about the brush, the shape of your brush, a round brush in which you could actually play around making thicker lines and thinner lines. And then that's one of the basics of calligraphy here. So you go up thick, and you go up thin. You go up thin and you go down thick when you write in calligraphy and connect everything. And another exercise, we've done this before when we do grass or things like that, is we put the brush down thick, we lift it thin, we lift it and move it to create a tip. I'm lifting it, lifting it, lifting it as I move it. If I don't move it, it will lift off. And look, if I make thick and just lift it, it stays thick. But if I as I lift it, I'm moving it, then I create that um, effect of the thin end of that stroke. Okay. Have a great week. Stay safe. practice, please, your watercolors. Have an area in that you can do, and things are accessible and easy to get to, so you can do more painting. Watch this video again if you need to. Pause it, go back. You could actually pause it and hold the screen and really look, pay attention on what I did, so you could replicate it. Um, all right. I'll see you soon. There's a lot of more colors coming up with spring and the weather, so lots of things to paint. And I'll see you soon.